Hey, what is going on, folks? This is Marco, and I go by the strange in game moniker Wang Vision. And for the first time, I'm going to be talking about a game that I have just recently, finished, right? It's a game called Stellar Blade, which very obviously has gotten quite a significant amount of attention from mainstream media outlets and like dedicated game journalists as well. And I feel that it hasn't quite gotten the fair shake that it deserves, right? We have a bit of gameplay playing in the background. It's going to be a mix of just random stuff going on, both in New Game Plus and in fresh New Game, as well as some minor combat. Be warned, I am not the best at the game. In fact, I suck at it quite badly, but we managed to eke out a win, beat the game, and I wanted to talk a little bit about where the game excels, where the game could still be improved, and where it just completely falls flat on its face. At the end of it, hopefully, it will help you come to a more informed decision as to whether you want to go ahead and pull the trigger on buying the game. At the very least, it should at least give you an idea of what the game is all about, what makes it fun, and what could be done to improve the experience that most people are going to likely have if they play the game at any level of skill. Whether, we're not talking about a very high skill gameplay session or a high skill run of the game. I'm not talking about getting no damage, no hit, blindfolded, whatever kind of challenge run you want to do for yourself, but rather just what a casual average Joe like myself, would can expect from the game when they do pick it up. Now, for starters, it is a hack and slash game that borrows very heavily from some mechanics that made games like Dark Souls popular. At the same time, it also has some combat intricacies that are more akin to games like Sekiro and games such as Neo, and obviously the more obvious comparisons having been drawn from Nier Automata. Right? Personally, I've never played Nier. I have a copy of the game, but I've never bothered actually trying it. So I won't be able to speak to how accurate that comparison is, but as Yoko Taro has very publicly acknowledged the game, I think that it's fair to say that the comparisons being drawn between the two titles are in fact substantiated, right, by the content of the game itself, right? So the titular character, Eve, as you can see in the gameplay footage that's going on in the background, is modeled after what I imagine to be a very attractive real-life model. But this is one of the biggest points of contention that the game had, right? And this is my biggest gripe with the game itself. I have nothing wrong with having an attractive female protagonist. It's great. I think it makes for good eye candy for players, and at the same time, it just gives the game that little bit of shock value, I suppose, which is arguably what the developers were going for when they were designing this, right? You don't create a character with this many costumes and this level of physical appeal if that wasn't in some way, shape, or form your intention, right? This is not accidental. This is not, oh, she turned out to be hot, right? This is, we are going to make her physically attractive. This is going to be a very heavy piece of marketing for us, right? That was very obviously deliberate, right? Now, the biggest point of contention that I have about this is that too many journalists and journalism outlets, whether dedicated to gaming or just casually covering the game because it's a thing, right? Focus too much on Eve, on the character, and the nature of her design, right? I don't want to call it one thing or the other, but the fact is she was designed to be very physically attractive, and she was given some very revealing costumes, right? Nothing wrong with that on its own, but when that becomes the focal point of your game, that becomes the selling point, essentially, there's bound to be a little bit lost in the shuffle there, where the game ends up being measured almost exclusively on that. And I think that's what happened with Stellar Blade, right? I think the biggest problem that most people had is that that became the focal point, and they didn't focus too much on the gameplay mechanics, which admittedly are the aspects of the game that need a lot of work, right? So let's start talking about some of the more basic things, right? Let's talk about controls. Controls are fine, right? It's a very simple light attack, heavy attack, jump, dash, and dodge. And then you have the option to parry as well, right? You can block or you can parry attacks. So it's your standard hack and slash action adventure game, button configuration, and combat options, right? Nothing really revolutionary or groundbreaking there. You can, there are some special dodge or counter moves that you can do, and you might see some of it in the gameplay footage playing in the background. You'll probably see it when an attack glows blue, you can counter it a certain way, in the same way that in Sekiro, if it was a thrusting attack that was a fatal attack, you could perform what was called a Mikiri counter. If it was something like a lightning strike, you could jump in the air and catch it, right? There are similar mechanics in Stellar Blade, and that's great. That's all nice and dandy. The problem lies in how it was implemented. The problem lies in the fact that in this game, the camera never really cooperates with you, and the button input is, while responsive, right, in terms of movement in the cardinal directions and the diagonals, right, the movement in terms of, am I dodging in the right direction, that's all fine. It works, right? The issue is that there is a little bit of a gap between your dodge movement and actually evading the attacks on screen. It almost feels sometimes like the enemy's attacks go active sooner than they should, right? Now, eventually I did get around that, and I was able to work around my dodge timings and my parry timings and all that. But it did get to a point where I was starting to wonder if I was an idiot in how I was playing the game, right? And then it got to a point later on, after I had invested a significant amount of time, because my first playthrough took about 41 hours, give or take. There was no bloat, so there was no AFK time there. I did do the side quests, and I did get all the costumes available in the first playthrough. So that accounts for why it took so long. But a lot of it was also getting lost, and we're going to talk about exploration and navigation in just a bit. But the controls and the camera needed a lot of work, from what I can tell. Oftentimes, I would find the camera getting stuck in really odd angles, and by odd angles, I mean angles that made it impossible for you to see the character, and also made it impossible for you to react to anything going on in the screen, because you couldn't see. You literally couldn't see anything that was really going on, right? It made it very difficult. It made it extremely difficult for some segments. In fact, it made it downright impossible at times. And this extends not only to the camera itself, but also how certain moves would work under certain circumstances. So say you were doing a dodge counter on a bridge, right? And the dodge counter teleports you a certain distance, right? You have no control over the distance, it simply teleports you. If it teleports you off a ledge, you just die, right? It teleports you off a ledge and you're fucked. There's nothing you can do. You find yourself falling, plummeting to your death, and depending on where you are in the stage, how far you are, you might have to replay an entire segment of the stage, right? No game should have a dodge mechanic that kills you for executing it right? And some might argue, but Marco, then don't do it on a ledge. The game doesn't give you that choice. You do not have the agency of choice in most of these situations. You are forced to fight on a narrow catwalk. You are forced to fight on a narrow bridge. And these enemies move around a lot. Now, the camera seems to have been designed to focus on Eve's ass. That is one of the biggest issues that I have. The fact that it seems to have been designed to focus on Eve's ass, where it should be focusing on the surroundings, the enemies trying to kill you. That makes it extremely difficult to navigate around certain situations, around certain combat encounters that you might run into during your playthrough of the game, right? Now, let's talk about something that the game does right? The actual combat. It feels satisfying, right? It feels satisfying. The combos are simple enough to do, but visually, they're extremely cool, right? If anyone has played Devil May Cry, right? Anyone watching this has probably seen, heard of, or played one of the Devil May Cry games. And if you've played anything that came after Devil May Cry 3, then you know what I'm talking about. The combos are pretty sick, right? And you'll see some of those moves in the background in the video playing, where the game just does an amazing job of making you look cool. And the best part is, they're not very hard to pull off. You can do some really sick looking stuff without killing yourself or spending 10 hours having to master a certain combo, right? You can do it very simply, and at the same time, the combat is engaging enough where you need to know what you're doing. You can't just be spamming these flashy combos, these flashy moves, because the flashy moves are limited, right? You have gauges that dictate how many times or how often you can use these moves. So there's burst moves, which you get later in the game, right? And there's beta moves, which you get a little earlier on, that are separate, have different functions, but are just eye candy to look at. They're gorgeous, they're gorgeously animated, they look really cool in terms of what Eve is doing, like the sword slashes and the spinny moves, and she has a flip kick that shatters the opponent's shield, and it's just really good looking. And it feels very fluid as well. When you're fighting mobs, you can dance around them and perform these really sick combos, right? The only time that it doesn't feel fluid is when the camera does what I just said it does, which is it just goes in all sorts of weird angles that don't benefit you in any way. In fact, they work to your detriment quite often. So, the combat is great, right? The combat is great. For a hack and slash adventure game, that's a massive point. That is a huge point that people are going to look at, and I think that Stellar Blade wins in that category. It does it really well, right? Now let's go back to a few more things that need a lot of work. One of the things is the game is not strictly an open world game, but there are some segments, there are some maps that allow for more freedom of exploration, right? It's not stage-based like Nioh, but at the same time, it's also not as open world as, say, a game like Elden Ring or God of War, where you can freely explore, and the maps are massive, you're exploring entire continents. Here, you're exploring giant deserts for the most part, right? The two areas where you actually have a map that you can have a look around and explore and find a lot of hidden stuff, they're both deserts. I'm sorry, they are both deserts, right? It kind of looks strange in the grand scheme of things because it's like this is like a post-apocalyptic sci-fi setting, and it has you exploring deserts and going into these really weird futuristic caves in them at some point, right? But the issue that I have with the exploration here is it does not allow you to set custom waypoints, right? Now, there's a lot of exploring and a hell of a lot of backtracking to do in this game. There's a ton of it, right? And the game takes so long for you to be able to unlock or open these chests that you found, or unlock the door that you just encountered that's locked, right? It could very well be 5 to 10 hours before you get the ability that lets you open that thing, right? There's no way you're going to remember where it is. Even with really good memory, and believe me when I say I have a pretty good memory, especially with the Souls games, right? I can remember, I wouldn't say everything, but more than most, right? The game not allowing you to set custom waypoints or leave markers for you to remind yourself of things is just such a massive step back from where gaming has evolved into, right? The game takes a huge step backwards in that regard, and it almost feels ridiculous for a game to have a map, to have such a broad scale of exploration and not allow you to set custom markers, because there's a ton of collectibles in the game, right? And there's a ton of hidden stuff, hidden equipment, hidden power-ups, hidden upgrades to your character that you're not going to be able to find without some way of marking your own map to remind you to go back later. Also, couple that with the fact that the game locks you out of certain areas at one point of the game, right? Towards the end of it, yes, but it locks you out from them to the point where if you missed some of these upgrades, you're going to be walking into the end game severely underpowered, right? It should have given players the option to mark their map, to remind themselves of things that they had already found. It's not giving them an unfair advantage. They've already found it. At least let them mark it so they remember to go back to it, especially if a lot of your movement options, your double jump, right, specifically, your ability to equip 2 exospines, your ability to your ability to transform into this game's version of the Devil Trigger from Devil May Cry, right? They come much later in the game, and it could very well be several hours. Like I said, there should be an option for you to remind yourself. There is absolutely no excuse in this day and age not to have that option, right? It's gimping players unnecessarily, and it makes the game more difficult and more tedious, more importantly, more tedious than it should be. A game should be challenging but rewarding, engaging but not tedious, right? If it gets to a point where you're saying, fuck this game, why can't I do this? Then there's a significant problem with it, right? I wish they had done that. I'm pretty sure they're going to add that as a feature later on. It's probably going to come in the form of a patch, right? But it's not in the game when it should be, right? And look, let's face it, even Elden Ring, which is from Software, a company known for deliberately making very difficult games, like Dark Souls, like Bloodborne, like Sekiro, right? In their open world game, Elden Ring, they put the ability to at least mark the map, right? So you're not running around willy-nilly not knowing where the hell you're going. If FromSoft could do that in that game, I do not see any reason why that wouldn't be in a game like Stellar Blade, which heavily encourages exploration and backtracking, right? Now, I get it. It's the studio's first AAA game. I'll give them that, right? And so far, I enjoy the game quite well. That's a feature that should already be there. It's like saying, oh, I'm going to make a fighting game where you can't block. It just, there's no excuse. You should be able to. Right? It should be in the game. Now, talking about things that should be in the game. To Stellar Blade's credit, New Game Plus was included as a standard inclusion in the game upon release. Right? Now, you're probably wondering, well, why is that such a big deal, Marco? Because God of War Ragnarok, a game that I love to bits, right? A game that I believe was universally praised by any outlet that reviewed it, right? God of War Ragnarok did not have New Game Plus as part of its standard release. In fact, we had to wait almost an entire year, if not longer. I can't remember the exact time scale. But we did have to wait significantly, right, to be able to play New Game Plus. Granted, their New Game Plus was amazing, but it should have been part of the initial release. Let's face it, in this day and age, New Game Plus in an action-adventure game is almost mandatory, right? It's something that should already be there. It should come in the tin, right? But sadly, not all developers include it. I'm happy to note that Shift Up did include it in Stellar Blade. So that's great. That's great. That's to their credit, right? Now, why are these little basic things such a big deal, right? Because they did not get the attention that they should have, right? You might say, Marco, that's a very shallow way of looking at it. No, not at all, right? Hear me out. The game got too much attention for all the wrong things. I'll say that again. The game got too much attention for all the wrong things. People were too worried about Eve's ass. People were worried about her costumes being too sexy. People were too worried about the game having a hypersexualized female protagonist. Nobody cares, right? That has nothing to do with the gameplay. If you're spending 70 to 80 US dollars on a game to play as a hot girl, you have bigger problems, right? People generally spend money on the games to enjoy the gameplay, right? If somebody is sinking that much money into it, the very basic aspects of the game, like can I explore properly in a game that heavily encourages and rewards, not just encourages, rewards exploration. Should I suffer through not being able to do that in a comfortable, sensible, logical fashion, right? Should I not be able to mark where I want to go, right? Should the camera be suddenly panning out and focusing on all the wrong things? No, it shouldn't, right? We as gamers, as consumers, should not have to suffer through that. That should never be the case. It should come as a very basic thing that developers look at before they put the game out and slap a 70, 80, $100 price tag on it, right? It absolutely has to be functioning. It's insulting when it isn't, because you're basically telling people you expect them to pay full rack for a game that isn't complete or that has mechanics that should have been noticed earlier. And that's where Stellar Blade really kind of got its pants right around its ankles, and we caught them with their pants right around their ankles. It becomes very difficult to appreciate a game entirely when baseline mechanics such as camera and exploration aren't working the way that they should, right? There's just no excuse for that. And the reason why is because those who got advanced copies of the game, right? Reviewers, journalists, people who got advanced copies of the game focused on all the wrong things. Instead of making an objective analysis of the game, they focused, oh, Eve's jugs are sticking out. Oh, look at the camera focusing on Eve's bum. I'm not going to ask for a refund because the camera is focused on her ass. I might ask for a refund if the game won't allow me to dodge properly, if the camera isn't working properly. And I am about to show another thing in this game which was taken for granted, is how hit stun works, right? Hit stun, for those who aren't aware, is in any game, when the game registers your character as having suffered a hit, it gives you a little bit of time to recover in between those hits, right? It prevents getting what's called stun locked from happening. Basically, that means that when you're hit, the game at least gives you time to recover so that you don't get infinitely locked down, getting wailed on by an enemy or by an environmental hazard. It gives you the opportunity to recover, right? Stellar Blade has no hit stun. So if you suddenly find yourself getting mobbed or getting shot at by multiple turrets at the same time, if one of them hits you, while you're in the animation of getting hit in the face by a cannon, you still have to suffer through getting hit by the next thing that decides to take a swing at you, and you have no recourse but to get hit. There is no way to mitigate it, there is no way to recover faster, there is no way to save yourself, right? That makes certain parts of the game just downright frustrating. I'm all for a challenge, but when something as basic as hit stun isn't registering properly, and the game doesn't give you an opportunity to recover from that hit, and it puts you in a situation where an enemy or an environmental hazard can infinitely stun you, we have a bit of a problem, because then it makes certain parts tedious, and we were just talking about how tedium shouldn't be factored into a game in that fashion, right? A lot of the deaths that I suffered in Stellar Blade did not feel like learning experiences. And when you die in a game, generally, the point is you should be able to learn how you died and how to prevent it from happening again. There was just too much random shit going on where I had no control over the outcome. And I found that to be detrimental to the game, right? It became detrimental to the experience, it became detrimental to the gameplay as a whole, because certain points just became exercises in tedium as opposed to learning experiences for me to understand why I was failing and how I can start succeeding, right? For anyone who plays a game to enjoy it at a certain level of skill, right? When there are situations that are almost completely random, it takes away any enjoyment that you might have in terms of building skill, because you never know when you can replicate that situation. Stellar Blade has a lot of that, and I do not find it to be advantageous. But again, in 5 minutes of playing the game, the demo, this was immediately apparent. If journalists and reviewers were not so focused on all the wrong things, on all the shallow aspects of the game, right, we could have gotten a much more polished experience, because the demo released about a month before the full release. There was more than enough time for it to be fixed. More than enough time. Right? It's a AAA studio. They would have been able to fix it. There's no way they wouldn't. But the focus was put on all the wrong things. Hence, we ended up with this. I wouldn't say it sucks, right? But I'd say it's like a flawed masterpiece, because the game is fun. The game has a lot of good sides to it, and I enjoyed the game as a game for its combat, for its exploration, not so much for its story, not so much for its voice acting, because the voice acting was just complete shite, right? But it's a good game. It could have been way better if the right attention was given to the right things. And I hope that if you are still watching this at this point, this has become an almost half-hour tirade about this, right? If you are still watching at this point, I hope that you are able to see things objectively. I hope that you're able to see why Stellar Blade could have been so much better if it got attention for all the right things, right? Or if it got attention in the right places instead of, what Eve has under her clothes. Game journalists and reviewers in general, right, need to really realign their focus. People are counting on you for your opinion on the game from a gameplay perspective, not from whatever political agenda you have, not from whatever woke agenda you want to push. That's just complete and utter bullshit, and it's a cop-out, and it's unfair to your viewers, and it's unfair to your readers, and it's unfair to the consumers who count on people like you to make informed decisions. So if you are one of those reviewers, journalists who focus more on Eve's parts than on the game itself and where it could improve and where it could have been better, give yourself a fucking pat on the back, because you just robbed everyone of an opportunity to enjoy a game even more, because it is a competent game. It does not suck. But pushing an agenda that has nothing to do, it has absolutely fuck all to do with the gameplay, right? That's just unfair to your viewers and your readers. And this game could have been so much better if it had been given the right attention. So I hope that if you come to the decision as a viewer here, as a consumer, to pick up a copy of Stellar Blade, right? I hope that you have a look at it beyond the costumes, beyond the aesthetics of the game, beyond what Eve was designed to be, right? And have a look at it from a gameplay perspective and try to enjoy it, because there is enjoyment to be had. There is a significant amount of enjoyment to be had in this game, and you are absolutely going to have a fun time hacking and slashing away at the Naytibas in the game and learning how to dodge this attack perfectly and parry this attack perfectly, and how when you finally score that killing blow on that boss that has been wailing on you for the last hour, you're going to feel a sense of satisfaction, believe me, because the game is very beautifully made, the graphics are top-notch, the combat system is easy to pick up, moderately challenging to master, but it's rewarding, right? And in a hack and slash game, that really matters. That's about, what, 3/4 of what I hope most people are playing this game for, right? Try to enjoy the game. Don't look at how people are having a whinge about her costume having been nerfed, quote unquote, or censored or changed to make it less provocative. That's second to the point. That's a distant second. That's a secondary consideration. You shouldn't even let that impact whether or not you give this game a shot, right? Because that should be a non-issue to everyone. What I am hoping you focus on is the game on its own merits, right? What are the puzzles like? What is the gameplay like? What is the combat like? Is the story compelling? No, I will tell you it does suck, right? The voice acting in English absolutely sucks ass. So yes, it does have areas it could get better at. I don't expect them to patch the voice acting, that's not going to happen, right? But I do expect them to make the necessary changes to the camera, to the responsiveness of the controls, to how watery Eve's jumps feel when you are trying to clear a platforming segment. I expect them to fix hit stun. I expect them to fix the ability to mark things on your map, for fuck's sake, right? These things I am looking forward to being addressed, because I am still going to finish this game. I do intend to get the Plat trophy on it. I will be streaming it on Twitch. There will be links in the description. I hope you find time to come hang out. Be warned, like I said at the beginning of the video, I kind of suck at the game, but hey, whatever, right? Do find time to sink your teeth into this game. It's reasonable fun. you're probably going to enjoy it. It's definitely worth picking up. I hope you take the game on its merits and try to enjoy it. Right? Don't let those ridiculous reviews whinging about costumes deter you from enjoying a perfectly good game. Right? That's it for me. I hope you've had fun. I hope you do pick up a copy of the game. You are going to like it. I'm pretty sure you will if you're a fan of the genre. Even if you're not, there's enough cool stuff in there to whet your appetite. Pick up a game, or don't. Whatever floats your boat, right? At the end of the day, I hope that this gave you some insight into the game. It did drag on a little bit long, but I do hope that that you found it informative, that you've gotten enough of a glimpse at what the game might have to offer, whether it'll be your cup of tea or not. And if this does take off, I do plan to be making more of these for upcoming titles in the future. I'm going to be doing some on Elden Ring's DLC. I may be revisiting some older titles, whatever the case might be. Right? Yeah, that's it. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your viewership. Thanks for sticking around until the end of this half-hour video. Take care of yourselves. Stay hydrated. Stay awesome. I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.